It was a quiet, gray morning in Maple Creek, a small rural town where not much ever happened. The dirt roads were lined with tall trees, and the air smelled of damp earth. Two Jehovah's Witnesses, an older man and a younger woman, walked side by side, knocking on trailer doors and handing out pamphlets about faith. They were used to the silence, the lack of responses, the slow pace of life in this sleepy town. As they approached the trailer at the end of the road, they noticed that the grass was overgrown and the yard was littered with old furniture and rusted cars. This was Gregory and Marlene Porter's home. The trailer itself looked as though it hadn't been cared for in a long time, with peeling paint and broken windows. The couple rarely spoke to anyone, but the witnesses had been here before, and they knew it was worth a try. The older man knocked on the glass door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. The woman peered through the glass, her face growing pale as she looked inside. "Michael, something's wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael stepped closer, squinting through the dirty glass. Inside the trailer, lying on the floor, was Marlene Porter. She wasn't moving. Her body was sprawled out, half-dressed, with her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The woman stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael moved his eyes across the room and froze. Slumped against the stove was Gregory, his face pale, his body twisted awkwardly. He too was dead. For a moment, neither of them moved. The trailer, with its broken furniture and cluttered mess, felt like a tomb. The silence of the place was unnerving, as if the air had been sucked out, leaving nothing but death. "We need to get help," Michael finally managed to say, pulling the younger woman away from the door. They hurried down the road, their footsteps echoing in the still morning air. The nearest place was Lily Dawson's country store, just a short walk away. Lily and her husband, Ethan, lived in a double-wide trailer that also served as a small store for the town. They sold everything from snacks to gasoline, and it was the heart of Maple Creek's small community. When they reached the store, they burst through the door, gasping for breath. Lily was behind the counter, arranging some cans on a shelf. She looked up, startled by the sight of the pale, shaken faces standing in front of her. "What happened?" Lily asked, her brow furrowing in concern. "Call the police," the woman cried, her voice shaking. "It's Gregory and Marlene Porter. They're dead." Lily's face went pale, and her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. Michael tried to explain, but his words came out jumbled, the horror of what they had seen still gripping him tightly. The younger woman couldn't stop shaking as she stood by the door, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you sure?" Lily asked, dialing the number for the local sheriff. "We saw them, inside the trailer, both of them, not moving," Michael said, his voice low and shaky. Lily made the call, her heart racing as she gave the sheriff the location. As she hung up the phone, she could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The store, usually warm and familiar, suddenly felt cold and foreign. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves as if nature itself sensed the looming darkness. "What could have happened?" the young woman asked, almost to herself, her voice barely a whisper. "Who would do something like that?" Lily didn't answer. She stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Gregory and Marlene had been strange, sure, but who would want to hurt them? Her mind flickered to Ethan, who was outside mowing the lawn, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding inside. She wanted to run to him, to tell him what had happened, but something held her back. As the minutes passed, the store remained eerily quiet. The witnesses stood near the door, waiting for the police, while Lily tried to make sense of the situation. The sheriff's car finally pulled up, its sirens cutting through the silence like a knife. Two officers stepped out, their faces grim as they entered the store. Lily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "It's at the end of the road, the Porter place," she said, pointing in the direction of the trailer. The witnesses saw them through the window. The officers nodded and hurried out, leaving the store in silence once again. The rain started to pour down, tapping against the roof like a rhythmic drumbeat. Lily stood behind the counter, watching the rain fall, her thoughts spinning in a million different directions. What had happened at the Porter's trailer? Who would have done something so terrible? And why did she suddenly feel a knot of fear tightening in her stomach? Maple Creek was a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was a small, quiet place nestled between rolling hills and thick woods. The kind of town where time seemed to stand still. There was only one main road, lined with houses and trailers, and at the end of it sat the Porter trailer. Nothing much ever happened in Maple Creek, and the people liked it that way. That was, until the deaths of Gregory and Marlene Porter. In the days after the discovery, whispers filled the air. The news spread like wildfire. People gathered in small groups, exchanging glances and theories about what could have happened. Everyone knew Gregory Porter. He was the quiet, strange type who kept to himself. Some called him a loner, others said he was troubled, but no one knew the real story of his life. Gregory had moved to Maple Creek with Marlene a few years ago, and ever since, the two had kept mostly to themselves. The trailer they lived in had once been in better shape, but over time, it became neglected, much like the couple's relationship. People in town noticed that Marlene would sometimes visit Lily Dawson's store for supplies, but Gregory rarely showed his face. When he did, he was always distant, his eyes haunted by something no one could quite understand. As the town buzzed with curiosity, some people started to share their encounters with Gregory. Eli Jones, the local mechanic, remembered fixing Gregory's truck a few months ago. He described Gregory as a man of few words, but something about his stare had unnerved Eli. "It was like he was looking right through me," Eli told the people gathered at Lily's store. Like he wasn't really there. Others recalled seeing Gregory driving around late at night. His old truck would rumble down the dirt roads, the headlights cutting through the darkness like two searching eyes. Nobody knew where he went or what he did during those night drives, but it became a familiar sight for some. Nancy, a woman who lived down the road from the Porters, said she had often heard the truck coming and going in the early hours. "He'd disappear for hours, come back just before sunrise," she said, but never said a word to anyone. There was always an air of mystery around Gregory Porter, and now that he and Marlene were dead, the mystery deepened. The sheriff's investigation into the deaths only fueled the town's curiosity. Sheriff Malcolm, an old, weathered man who had served the town for decades, didn't say much to the public. He kept his findings to himself, which only made people wonder more. The official word was that Gregory and Marlene's deaths were being treated as suspicious, but no one knew exactly how they had died. Some folks thought it was murder. Maybe Marlene did it, then took her own life, some speculated. Others thought Gregory might have snapped. After all, he had been a strange, unpredictable man. But there were those who believed something far darker was at play. As the days passed, more stories about Gregory began to surface. People remembered the fight he'd had with a neighbor years ago, long before he came to Maple Creek. Back then, he was married to someone else, a woman named Helen, who had left him under mysterious circumstances. Some said she'd run off, others whispered she had simply disappeared. No one really knew. After the fight, which ended with Gregory falling into a barbed wire fence and leaving him with a long scar across his back, he packed up and moved to Maple Creek with Marlene. He never spoke of his past, and the people of Maple Creek didn't ask. But now, with Gregory and Marlene dead, those old secrets began to stir once more. People wondered what had driven Gregory to Maple Creek in the first place. Had he been running from something? Or someone? Was there a shadow from his past that had finally caught up with him? Lily Dawson, who had known Gregory better than most, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She remembered the strange interactions she had with him in the store. The way he would sometimes stand there, staring at the shelves, as if lost in thought. Marlene had come to the store more often than Gregory, but Lily had never gotten close to her. Marlene had always seemed nervous, like she was hiding something. Now, Lily wondered if that something had been Gregory. One evening, as the rain poured down over the town, Lily sat at the counter of her store, thinking about the last time she had seen Marlene. It had been a few weeks before the deaths. Marlene had come in for some groceries, but something was different about her. She had looked more tired than usual, her eyes sunken and her face pale. Lily had tried to ask if everything was all right, but Marlene had brushed it off, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine," she had said, but Lily could see the fear behind her eyes. Now, as the rain tapped against the windows and the town continued to talk, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that Marlene had been trying to tell her something without words. But now, it was too late. The mystery of Gregory and Marlene Porter's deaths hung over Maple Creek like a thick fog. The more people talked, the more questions seemed to arise. What had really happened in that trailer? Was it an accident? A murder? Or something more sinister? Something buried deep in Gregory's past? And as the town tried to move on, no one could forget the image of the two dead bodies in that rundown trailer at the end of the road. A dark secret left behind in the quiet town of Maple Creek. As the days passed, Maple Creek couldn't stop talking about the tragic deaths of Gregory and Marlene Porter. The town was still buzzing with gossip, and everyone had their own theory about what happened. But while people shared their thoughts, there was one person who stayed quiet: Ethan Sweet. Ethan was a man of few words. He lived in a small, worn-down trailer on the edge of town, next to his wife, Beatrice. He spent most of his time mowing the lawn, fixing things around the house, or sitting on the front porch, staring out into the distance. But the one thing that stood out about Ethan was his night drives. For as long as anyone could remember, Ethan had a habit of getting into his old, rusty truck late at night and disappearing into the darkness. No one knew where he went or why he drove around at such odd hours, but everyone noticed. The sound of his truck's engine rumbling down the gravel road had become a familiar noise in the quiet town. Some folks speculated that Ethan's night drives were just his way of escaping the monotony of life. Others thought he was hiding something. But after the Porters were found dead, more and more people began to wonder if Ethan's night drives were connected to what had happened. The timing seemed suspicious. It wasn't just the night drives that made people uneasy. Ethan had a past that few talked about, but everyone knew. Years ago, long before he married Beatrice, Ethan had been in a violent fight with his first wife, Emily. They had argued late one night, and in a drunken rage, Ethan had stormed out of the house and stumbled into a barbed wire fence, cutting his back open. The fight left a permanent scar, both physically and emotionally. After that night, Emily disappeared from Ethan's life, leaving him alone and bitter. Nobody knew exactly what happened to Emily. Some said she left town and never looked back. Others believed something darker had taken place, though there was no proof. Ethan never talked about it, and eventually the town let it go. But now, with Gregory and Marlene's deaths hanging over Maple Creek, people began to wonder again. Could Ethan's past have caught up with him? Could there be more to his quiet life than anyone realized? Late one night, after Beatrice had gone to bed, Ethan grabbed his truck keys and stepped outside. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the yard, and the air was thick with tension. He climbed into his truck, the old engine groaning to life as he pulled out onto the empty road. The hum of the tires on the gravel was the only sound that filled the silence of the night. Ethan didn't have a destination in mind. He never did. These night drives weren't about going anywhere. They were about escaping. Driving through the dark roads of Maple Creek, Ethan let his thoughts drift. The memories of his past, the mistakes he had made, the secrets he kept buried deep inside, it all came rushing back to him in the quiet of the night. As he passed the familiar landmarks, the old church, the closed-down diner, the empty fields, his mind wandered back to the day he met Marlene at the local store. It had been a brief encounter, just a casual exchange of words, but something about her had stuck with him. She had seemed troubled. He had noticed it in her eyes, the way she looked over her shoulder, as if she was afraid someone was watching her. Ethan had felt a strange connection to her, a sense that they both carried a heavy burden. Then there was Gregory. Ethan didn't know him well, but he had seen him around town, driving that beat-up truck of his late at night. It reminded Ethan of himself. He had always thought there was something off about Gregory, the way he seemed distant from everyone, lost in his own world. And now Gregory was dead along with Marlene. As Ethan continued down the dark, winding road, his grip tightened on the steering wheel. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that someone or something was out there, watching him. The thought sent a chill down his spine. His mind flashed back to the night he had driven past the Porter trailer. He had seen Gregory sitting on the front steps, staring blankly into the night, while Marlene stood in the yard, her face barely visible in the shadows. Ethan had slowed down, curious, but Marlene had quickly turned away, as if she didn't want to be seen. That moment had stuck with him, replaying in his mind over and over again. What had Gregory and Marlene been hiding? What secrets had they taken to their graves? As he rounded a sharp bend in the road, the headlights of his truck caught something in the distance. It was just a glimpse, a flash of movement on the side of the road. Ethan's heart raced, and he slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a screeching halt. He stared into the darkness, his pulse pounding in his ears. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it again, a figure moving through the trees, disappearing into the woods. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Was it just his imagination, or had he really seen something? Suddenly, the memories of that long-ago night with Emily came flooding back. The argument, the anger, the blood from the barbed wire. He had tried to forget, tried to bury it deep inside, but it always found a way to surface. And now, with the deaths of Gregory and Marlene, the past was creeping up on him again. Ethan took a deep breath and pressed his foot on the gas, driving away from the spot where he had seen the figure. His mind raced with questions, but there were no answers. Not yet. All he knew was that something wasn't right in Maple Creek. And whatever it was, it had a hold on him too. As he pulled back into his driveway and turned off the engine, Ethan sat in the dark truck for a long moment, staring at the empty road ahead. The night was silent once more, but the weight of his past and the mystery of the porter's deaths pressed down on him like a heavy shadow. Something was coming for him. He could feel it. The sun had set, and the quiet town of Maple Creek was once again blanketed in darkness. But while most of the town settled in for the night, Ethan Sweet was wide awake, staring out of his kitchen window. His wife, Beatrice, had gone to bed hours ago, her soft snores echoing from the bedroom. Ethan, however, couldn't sleep. His mind was too restless, filled with thoughts of Marlene Porter. Marlene had been dead for only a few days, but her memory clung to Ethan like a shadow. He hadn't told anyone about their secret, about the nights they spent together when no one was watching, about the things they did in the dark. Ethan had always prided himself on being a quiet, private man, but Marlene had stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just desire, it was a dangerous thrill, the excitement of something forbidden. Their affair had started innocently enough, or so Ethan told himself. It had been one of those nights when Beatrice had gone to bed early, and Ethan found himself out in his yard, staring up at the stars. That's when Marlene had appeared. Walking slowly down the road, as if she didn't have a care in the world. She had waved at him, a small, almost shy gesture, and Ethan had waved back. She'd come closer, standing at the edge of his yard, the moonlight casting a soft glow on her face. "Couldn't sleep?" she had asked, her voice soft and smooth. Ethan had shrugged. "Just thinking," he had replied. He didn't mention what he was thinking about, that he had seen her and Gregory arguing earlier that day, their voices loud enough to carry across the street. Gregory had stormed off in his truck, leaving Marlene standing alone in the yard. She had looked upset, but Ethan hadn't approached her. He had learned long ago to stay out of other people's business. But now, here she was, standing just a few feet away from him, and for the first time, Ethan found himself wondering what was really going on between her and Gregory. Marlene had taken a step closer, her eyes meeting his. "It's quiet out here," she had said, almost as if she were talking to herself. Then she smiled, a sad, knowing smile, too quiet sometimes. Ethan hadn't known how to respond. He had always thought of Marlene as a pretty, quiet woman, someone who kept to herself. But now, standing so close, he could see the weariness in her eyes, the weight of something she was carrying inside. Before he knew it, he had invited her to sit with him on the porch, offering her a drink. That night had been the first of many. Marlene had started coming by more often, sometimes in the late afternoon when Beatrice was busy in the store, and sometimes late at night when the town was asleep. At first, they had just talked about the weather, the town, their lives. Ethan had been careful not to ask too many questions about Gregory, but Marlene had started opening up on her own. "He's not the man I thought he was," she had said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "Gregory? He's different now. He's angry all the time. We don't even talk anymore." Ethan had listened, nodding quietly, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction that Marlene was confiding in him. He had told himself he was just being a friend, offering a listening ear. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He had started looking forward to her visits, feeling a flutter of excitement every time he heard her knock on the door. Then, one night, everything changed. It had been a warm, humid evening, and Marlene had shown up just after sunset. She was wearing a loose dress that clung to her body in the heat, and there was something different in her eyes that night, something darker, more intense. They had sat on the porch, sipping cold drinks and talking like usual, but the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Marlene had leaned in closer, her hand brushing against Ethan's arm. It had been such a small, innocent gesture, but it had sent a shock of electricity through him. Before he knew what was happening, Marlene had kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, as if she had been holding back for too long. Ethan had kissed her back, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew it was wrong, knew he was betraying Beatrice, knew that Marlene was married, but in that moment, he didn't care. All he cared about was the way Marlene made him feel, in the rush of excitement that surged through him like a drug. That night, they hadn't stopped at just a kiss. Ethan had driven her to the edge of town, to a secluded spot where no one would see them. They had parked behind a rundown shed, hidden from the road, and there in the darkness, they had given in to their desires. Afterward, as they sat in the car, the guilt had started to creep in. Marlene had been quiet, staring out the window, her hands folded in her lap. Ethan had wanted to say something, to break the silence, but he couldn't find the words. "I should go," Marlene had said finally, her voice flat. She had leaned over, kissed him on the cheek, and then slipped out of the car without another word. Ethan had watched her walk away, her figure disappearing into the night, and for the first time he had felt a sinking dread in the pit of his stomach. From that night on, their affair had continued in secret. Marlene would still come by, and they would steal moments together when no one was watching. But something had shifted between them. There was a heaviness to their encounters now, a feeling that they were both heading down a path from which there was no return. Ethan knew it couldn't last. He knew that sooner or later, someone would find out. And when they did, everything would fall apart. But even as the guilt gnawed at him, even as the weight of their secret pressed down on him, Ethan couldn't stop. He was in too deep. The air in Maple Creek was thick with tension. Word had spread quickly about the discovery of Marlene and Gregory Porter's lifeless bodies, and the small town was in shock. Nobody could believe that something so terrible had happened right in their midst. People whispered in hushed voices and rumors ran wild, but no one knew the full truth, or even how it had all come to this. The morning of the murders, everything had seemed normal. Ethan had woken up early as usual and headed outside to mow the lawn. Beatrice was in the kitchen, baking for the store, and the day had felt like any other. But as Ethan pushed the mower across the yard, his mind kept drifting back to Marlene. It had been 2 days since he last saw her, since their last secret meeting. The guilt was weighing heavier on him with each passing moment. He had promised himself that it was the last time, that he would end things for good. But now, as he thought of her, a part of him wondered what was happening with her and Gregory. Did they suspect anything? Was Gregory on to them? Later that afternoon, the storm clouds began to gather. The wind picked up, and the sky darkened. Beatrice called to Ethan from the porch. "Looks like it's going to rain. You better come in soon." Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He hadn't seen Gregory's truck pass by today, which was unusual. Gregory often drove past the store on his way into town, but today there had been no sign of him or Marlene. As the first drops of rain began to fall, something tugged at Ethan's chest, a strange sense of unease. He tried to shake it off, telling himself that everything was fine. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. It wasn't until later that night, when the knock came on the door, that Ethan's fears were confirmed. A frantic voice called out, "Ethan, Beatrice, open up." It was Simone Taylor, their neighbor from down the road. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling as she stood on the porch, drenched from the rain. "You need to come to the store right now. There's been an incident." Ethan's heart raced as he followed Simone to the store, Beatrice close behind him. When they arrived, they found two Jehovah's Witnesses, an older man and a young woman, standing near the payphone, looking shaken. Simone quickly explained that they'd been going door to door, sharing their pamphlets when they approached the porter's trailer. Through the glass door, they had seen the bodies. Marlene lying face up in the living room, wearing nothing but a bra, and Gregory slumped against the stove, motionless. "They're dead," the older man whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "We didn't go inside, we just ran to call the police." The words hit Ethan like a sledgehammer. Dead. Marlene and Gregory were dead. It didn't seem real. He couldn't process it. His hands started to tremble, and for a moment he thought he might collapse. Beatrice reached out, grabbing his arm for support. What happened?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely audible. Simone shook her head. "No one knows yet. The police are on their way. It looks like a murder-suicide, but we won't know for sure until they investigate." Murder-suicide. The phrase echoed in Ethan's mind, and suddenly, the room felt too small, the air too thin. He could hardly breathe. Was it true? Had Gregory snapped and killed Marlene before turning the gun on himself? Or had something else happened? Something darker? As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew. Ethan stood frozen, his thoughts racing. He knew he shouldn't be thinking about himself in a moment like this, but he couldn't help it. If the police dug too deep, if they started asking questions, would they discover his affair with Marlene? Would they find out that he had been with her just days before she died? He could feel Beatrice's eyes on him, and for a moment, he wondered if she knew. Did she suspect anything? Could she see the guilt written on his face? Finally, the wail of police sirens cut through the night, and soon, officers were swarming the porter's trailer. Yellow crime scene tape went up, and the flashing lights from the squad cars bathed the whole area in an eerie glow. Ethan watched from a distance, his stomach in knots. He wanted to leave, wanted to get as far away from this nightmare as possible, but he couldn't. Not without drawing suspicion. The police worked quickly, moving in and out of the trailer, their faces grim. After what felt like hours, an officer finally approached the small crowd that had gathered outside. "We're investigating this as a homicide," he announced. "We can't say much yet, but it appears that both Marlene and Gregory Porter were shot. We're still working on determining the exact circumstances." Shot. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a tragic accident. Someone had murdered them. But who? The officer continued. "If anyone has any information about the Porters or saw anything suspicious in the last few days, please come forward." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced around at the others, at Beatrice, at Simone, at the two Jehovah's Witnesses. No one seemed to notice the beads of sweat forming on his forehead or the way his hands were trembling at his sides. He knew he had to keep calm. He had to act normal. But the guilt was suffocating him, and the fear of being found out was gnawing at his insides. As the night dragged on and the police continued their investigation, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, was this his fault? Had Gregory found out about the affair and confronted Marlene? Had their secret finally caught up with them? And if so, how long before it caught up with him too? The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, and as the rain poured down, Ethan stood in the shadows, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him like never before. The next morning, Maple Creek was quiet, but a thick cloud of fear hung over the town. The news of Marlene and Gregory's murder had spread like wildfire. People gathered in small groups, whispering and exchanging worried glances. Everyone was on edge, and it felt as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for answers. At the convenience store, Ethan sat at the counter trying to keep himself busy. Beatrice was behind him, sorting through the deliveries. But his mind was elsewhere, racing with thoughts about the investigation. The police had spent hours at the Porter's trailer the night before, and now they were back, interviewing anyone who might have known the couple. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he could be a suspect. Just then, a police officer named Officer Harris walked into the store. He was tall, with a serious face and a notepad in his hand. Ethan's heart raced as he recognized him. Officer Harris had a reputation for being thorough and relentless. "Good morning," Officer Harris said, looking around the store. "I need to speak with you, Ethan." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Of course, officer. What can I do for you?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but he could feel the tension building inside him. "I have a few questions about the Porters," Officer Harris said, leaning against the counter. "I understand you knew them well?" Ethan nodded, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "Yes, I've seen them around. They came into the store often. Did you notice anything strange about them recently? Any arguments or odd behavior?" the officer asked, his pen ready to jot down notes. Ethan shook his head, feigning ignorance. "No, not really. They seem normal to me." Officer Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "What about the night of the murder? Where were you?" Ethan's heart raced again. "I was here, closing up the store. Beatrice can vouch for me." "Is that so?" the officer replied, turning his attention to Beatrice, who was nervously folding a bag of chips. "You were with Ethan the whole night?" Beatrice nodded quickly. "Yes, I was here. We were just finishing up when the police came." "Okay," Officer Harris said, writing down their alibis. "I'll need to confirm that. If you think of anything else, please let me know." As the officer walked away, Ethan let out a sigh of relief, but it didn't last long. The weight of the investigation loomed over him. He knew he had to keep his cool, but he couldn't shake the fear that the truth would come to light. Later that afternoon, the police set up a command center in the park near the store. Officers were everywhere, searching for clues and interviewing more people. Ethan watched as they pulled away the yellow tape from the Porter's property, making the area feel even more haunted. Ethan tried to stay busy, but his mind kept racing. He thought about Marlene and the conversations they had shared in secret. What if someone had seen them together? What if someone had overheard them? Panic began to creep in. Meanwhile, the police found a gun at the crime scene. It belonged to Gregory, but it didn't make sense. Why would he kill Marlene and then himself? Ethan felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. The police were leaning toward the idea of a murder-suicide, but he knew it was more complicated than that. As night fell, the rain started again. Ethan was locking up the store when he saw Officer Harris approaching. This time, the officer had a different look on his face, one that showed he meant business. "Ethan, we need to talk again," Officer Harris said firmly. "We just received a report from one of the neighbors. They said they saw you leaving the Porter's trailer the night before the bodies were found." Ethan's heart raced as he tried to process the accusation. "That's impossible. I was here all night," he insisted, his voice rising. "Calm down," Officer Harris replied, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. "We have to follow up on every lead. If you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about. But I need you to tell me everything. Did you visit them that night?" Ethan could feel the panic rising within him. He wanted to scream that he had nothing to do with it, but instead he swallowed hard and thought carefully about his words. "I saw Marlene 2 nights ago, but I didn't go there last night, I swear." 2 nights ago, Officer Harris wrote it down. "What were you doing there?" Ethan hesitated. Should he tell the truth about their affair? "I just wanted to see her. We were friends." "Friends?" The officer's tone was skeptical. "Why did you go to her place?" Ethan felt trapped. The walls seemed to close in around him. "I just wanted to check on her. I heard things were tough between her and Gregory." Officer Harris studied Ethan for a long moment. "You need to understand, Ethan. This is serious. If we find anything that ties you to their deaths, you could be looking at a lot of trouble. Be honest with me, and I can help." Ethan's mind raced. He had to think fast. "I really didn't do anything wrong. I just cared about her. I wanted to make sure she was okay." Officer Harris nodded slowly, but the suspicion in his eyes was clear. "I'll be keeping an eye on you, Ethan. If you remember anything else, let me know." As the officer walked away, Ethan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The investigation was closing in on him, and he had to act quickly. He knew he had to find a way to protect himself, even if it meant diving deeper into the secrets surrounding Marlene and Gregory's deaths. That night, as the storm raged outside, Ethan lay awake in bed, consumed by fear and guilt. He could hear the rain pounding against the roof and the wind howling through the trees. What had he gotten himself into? He had to find out the truth about the porter's murder before it was too late. The morning sun rose slowly over Maple Creek, but Ethan felt like it was the darkest day of his life. The events of the past few days hung heavily in his mind, and guilt wrapped around him like a thick fog. He had barely slept, and his nerves were frayed. Just as he stepped out of his house, he saw Lily Porter standing outside his store. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked as if she had been up all night, and her sadness twisted Ethan's heart. But today there was something else in her eyes: determination. "Ethan," she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. "We need to talk right now." Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew she wanted answers, and he feared what would come next. "Lily, I'm so sorry about Gregory. I can't imagine how you feel." "Save it," she snapped. "I know something is wrong. I can see it in your eyes. You're hiding something from me." Ethan felt the blood rush to his face. "Lily, I swear I'm not hiding anything. I cared about Marlene, but I didn't hurt her." "Stop lying," she yelled, stepping closer, her fists clenched. "I heard you were at their trailer the night they died. What were you doing there?" He swallowed hard, panic flooding his mind. I was just dropping by. I didn't know anything bad would happen." "Then why did you leave so quickly?" Lily demanded, her voice rising. "Why were you with Marlene? Were you two together?" Ethan felt trapped, the weight of the truth pressed down on him. "Lily, please, it's not what you think. Yes, Marlene and I were close, but I didn't hurt her. I would never hurt her." Lily's eyes narrowed, searching his face for the truth. "I know Marlene wanted to leave Gregory. Did she tell you? Did you encourage her?" Ethan's heart raced. He could see the pain in her eyes, and it twisted his gut. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't know it would lead to this. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." "Then who did this?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "My brother is dead. I can't just sit back and let this go. I will find out what happened, Ethan." Ethan felt a wave of fear wash over him. "Lily, please listen to me. You don't understand. This is dangerous. If you dig too deep, you could put yourself in harm's way. I'm already in danger. My brother is gone, and I need answers." She took a deep breath, her voice lowering. "You need to tell me everything you know, Ethan. I won't stop until I find out the truth." Ethan wanted to tell her everything, to share the burden of guilt that weighed so heavily on his heart. But he also knew that the truth could shatter everything: Lily's memories of Gregory, the fragile piece of Maple Creek. "Lily, I care about you, and I don't want you to get hurt," he said softly. "But I can't just give you all the answers." "It's complicated." "Complicated?" she echoed, anger flashing in her eyes. "You think that makes it any better? My brother is dead because of some complicated mess. If you know something, you need to speak up." Ethan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He was losing her trust, and that scared him more than anything. "I promise, if I know anything, I'll tell you. But right now, you need to be careful. The police are looking for answers too." Lily shook her head, frustration boiling over. "You're more worried about yourself than my brother's death. I can't believe you." Before he could say another word, Lily turned and stormed away, leaving Ethan standing there, filled with a mix of regret and fear. He watched her disappear down the street, her determination clear in every step. He knew she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. And that truth could destroy everything. As he stood there, his heart racing, he realized he had to make a choice. Would he protect himself, or would he protect Lily? The stakes had never been higher, and Ethan felt the walls closing in around him. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. The day after Lily confronted Ethan was dark and gloomy, matching the heavy mood in Maple Creek. Ethan felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a storm cloud. He spent the morning pacing in his small store, trying to focus on customers, but his mind was elsewhere. Each time the door opened, his heart skipped a beat, hoping it would be Lily returning to talk. Instead, it was just the usual townsfolk coming in for snacks and drinks. The familiar faces offered him polite smiles, but Ethan could see the worry in their eyes. News of the Porter and Tussle murders had spread like wildfire, and everyone was on edge. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided to take a break and go for a drive. He needed to clear his mind. As he drove down the winding roads, the trees swayed gently in the wind, but his heart was anything but calm. Thoughts of Lily's confrontation replayed in his head like a broken record. He knew he had to do something to set things right, but he didn't know how. Suddenly, he spotted a figure standing by the roadside. It was Lily, her expression fierce as she waved him down. Ethan's stomach dropped. He pulled over, unsure of what to expect. "Get in," he said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Lily climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes filled with determination. "I've been talking to people in town," she said, her voice steady. "I need you to tell me the truth about what happened that night." Ethan sighed heavily. "Lily, I don't think—" "Stop," she interrupted. "You can't keep avoiding this. I deserve to know the truth about Gregory. He was my brother, and I loved him." Ethan clenched the steering wheel, feeling the pressure build. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I didn't want this to happen. I never meant for any of it to go this far." Lily stared at him, frustration clear on her face. "You have to understand. The police are investigating, and I don't trust them to find out what really happened. If you know something, you need to tell me." Ethan felt the urge to spill everything, to tell her about the affair, the moments of weakness, and the fear that gripped him, but he hesitated, knowing how much pain that truth could bring. "Lily, if I tell you, it could put you in danger." "Danger? What do you mean?" Lily's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension in the car. "The people involved are not safe to mess with," he admitted, his heart racing. "I'm scared for you." Lily's expression softened for a moment, but it quickly turned back to determination. "I don't care about danger. I care about getting justice for Gregory. You owe it to him and to me." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling cornered. Okay, but you have to promise me that you won't do anything reckless. You have to let me help you." "I promise," she said, her voice firm. "Just tell me everything." Taking a deep breath, Ethan began to explain. He told her about his relationship with Marlene and how it had grown into something more than he had intended. He shared the secret meetings, the stolen moments, and how he had found himself in a complicated web of emotions. As he spoke, Lily listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. She absorbed every word, her heart aching for her brother but understanding the complexity of the situation. As the investigation reaches its climax, the police finally piece together the fragments of the tangled web of relationships and secrets that have engulfed the town. After weeks of interrogations, dead ends, and mounting tension, the truth about the murders of Gregory Porter and Marlene Simmons comes to light in a shocking revelation. Lily Porter, Gregory's sister, refuses to accept that the case is unsolvable. Her suspicions about Ethan Sweet continue to grow as she notices inconsistencies in his behavior. One evening, unable to bear the weight of the unanswered questions any longer, Lily confronts Ethan at the convenience store after hours. She corners him, accusing him of hiding something, demanding to know what really happened the night Gregory and Marlene were killed. Ethan, already on edge from the ongoing investigation and his deteriorating marriage to Simone, finally breaks down under Lily's pressure. He confesses, but his confession takes a dark and unexpected turn. Through tears and regret, Ethan reveals that he killed both Gregory and Marlene, but the motives were driven by two distinct reasons. Ethan admits that he murdered Gregory Porter out of jealousy and fear. Gregory had discovered Ethan's affair with Marlene, which had been going on for months in secret. Gregory confronted Ethan, threatening to expose the affair to Simone and to the entire town. Knowing that this would destroy his marriage, his reputation, and his life in Maple Creek, Ethan felt cornered. One night, after a heated argument in the Porter home, Gregory told Ethan he was going to reveal everything. In a moment of panic and rage, Ethan lashed out, hitting Gregory with a blunt object, killing him instantly. It was a crime of passion, fueled by Ethan's desperation to protect his double life. After Gregory's death, Ethan and Marlene tried to continue their affair, but the guilt began to consume Ethan. He found himself unable to cope with the weight of what he had done. Worse still, he discovered that Marlene had been using him all along. She had no intention of leaving Gregory for him, and she had been involved with other men in town, manipulating them for her own gain. Feeling betrayed and manipulated by Marlene, Ethan's feelings of guilt turned into anger. One night, in a confrontation outside Marlene's house, Ethan accused her of playing him for a fool. Marlene, unrepentant, mocked him, saying she never loved him and only used him to escape her boring life. In a fit of rage and humiliation, Ethan strangled her, leaving her body near Gregory's to make it look like a murder-suicide. As Ethan finishes his confession, the weight of his crimes crashes down on him. He collapses in front of Lily, sobbing, admitting that he destroyed not just his own life, but those of everyone around him. Lily, horrified and heartbroken, calls the police, and Ethan is arrested shortly after. Maple Creek, once a peaceful small town, is left reeling from the devastating truth. The murders that rocked the community were not the work of a shadowy outsider, but of one of their own, a man driven to violence by jealousy, fear, and betrayal. In the end, Ethan's actions serve as a haunting reminder of the dangerous consequences of secrets, lies, and unchecked emotions. The town will never be the same, and the memory of Gregory and Marlene's tragic deaths will linger in the minds of the townspeople for years to come. Please like the video and subscribe the channel, and click on bell icon.